Welcome back, everybody. We are enjoying this week of learning about how to homeschool when life is hard. My name is Jennifer Dow, and today I have with me Miss Mary-Jo Tate. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jennifer. It's great to talk with you today.
Wonderful. Well, let me tell you a little bit about Mary-Jo. Mary-Jo Tate homeschooled her 4 sons for 23 years. She is an international book editor and the author of Flourish, Balance for Homeschool Moms, as well as critical companion to F. Scott Fitzgerald. A lifelong bibliophile, she teaches online literature classes to help high schoolers and adults understand, appreciate, and love great books. She enjoys speaking at education, writing, and business conferences, and she has a heart to help, encourage, and inspire other moms. You can connect with Mary-Jo at maryjotate.com. Welcome.
Oh, I'm so glad to be talking with you, Jennifer.
Oh, same here. I love your wisdom. I just soak it all in. I will be taking notes as she talks, so just everybody, you should as well. But this week we're talking about homeschooling when life is hard. We wanted to just face this stuff head on and not do the whole pretend things aren't as bad as they are, but also like, how do we live? And we don't want to be depressed forever. And so we're going through some things that we deal with as humans, and how do we go through them, especially when we're homeschooling. And so I wanted to ask you, I mean, you've homeschooled for 23 years. What have been some hard things that you have had to face in addition to trying to homeschool?
Well, for me, the obvious answer is that my husband left when our sons were 9, 6, 4.5, and 6 months old.
Mm-hmm.
And all I had really ever hoped to be was to be at home with my kids. And I was writing and editing on the side, but what I really wanted to be was at home with my kids, continue homeschooling them. And so I was determined to find a way to make that happen. And homeschooling with 2 parents is hard, but homeschooling as a single parent is even more complicated. You don't have the support, financial, emotional, just you're more outnumbered than you were. And, but God was very gracious to us. We were able to continue homeschooling all the way through. And after 23 years, I'm graduated as a homeschool mom, but I still love teaching and encouraging other folks. So I think homeschooling as a single parent is very much like being suddenly thrown into homeschooling because of the pandemic or whatever else. A lot of times we're encountering things that we had never expected. And we have to sort of reinvent ourselves and reinvent our lives and reinvent our days to accommodate this new normal. When I talk with single moms, especially in the early years, one of the things I always encourage them to remember is that life is not going to be the same, but it can still be good. So let's work on finding a new kind of normal. And as Teddy Roosevelt says, do the best you can with what you have where you are, instead of floundering around looking for some sort of fairy tale that's not going to exist.
Right. I remember facing that. I'm a single mom as well, and almost 3 years now, so I'm still kind of a new single mom. And when I made that shift and realized and believed, oh, my life, I can actually still have a beautiful, wonderful life.
Right.
It's just gonna look different. That's when I felt like I had my power back to create something beautiful.
And that's such an encouragement to hear. I mean, you used words like beautiful and wonderful. It's not just an okay life or a whatever life or a compromised life. We can have a beautiful, wonderful life, and God is faithful through all of these circumstances. And so much of it has to do with just determining, okay, how am I going to move forward in the situation where I am now? One of my, probably the most important point that I teach when I'm speaking or counseling people or whatever is to find peace in the space between the ideal and reality. We all know what the ideal is. That's what, if you could do anything you wanted to do and have anything you wanted to have without any of the realities of everyday life without any of the inconveniences of how your world is falling apart, without the phone ringing and the baby crying and the dog barfing on the floor and all that kind of thing.
Right.
But the reality is, okay, all of those things, that just the daily life. And so what are you going to do in the middle? How are you going to let go of that ideal on the one hand and address the reality you have here, and come together in the middle to create that beautiful, wonderful life? So you can find peace in that space between the ideal and reality. And I think that describes beautifully what you have just described doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You don't have to get it all exactly right all the time.
How about that? Because
Yeah.
you know you're not anyway. I mean, I think
Right.
that's like the shame that you feel as a single mom. I mean, for me, that has been, you, especially being in a conservative Christian community, you have experience, not that everyone's horrible, but you fear that everyone thinks a certain way about you. You have that shame. You're like, I was supposed to be married forever. And then, this tragic thing happens and it was completely outside of my control. And now, what do people think of me? And you just, it's scary.
And I think you've touched on something important there too, Jennifer, because you talked about you think, we think, and the shame often comes from inside us. I know there are some single moms and even married homeschoolers who do experience actual shame and criticism from others, but a lot of it is our own imagination. I do have friends who have been shamed intentionally by others, but I also have been very blessed to have very supportive friends, very supportive churches, and a lot of the shame we feel comes from inside our imaginations.
Yeah.
And we're the only ones who can control that. We have got to let that go. We've got to, stand up straight, hold our heads high, and lean on God, and just move ahead with how what's best for us, and particularly for our families. And that's going to look a little bit different for everybody. And what's interesting now, of course, is that the whole world has been thrown into some kind of crisis. It's not just single moms. It's not just people who've lost jobs. The entire world has been turned upside down. So to one degree or another, right now, everybody's in crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot to deal with. But it also puts us all in a similar place. We're all trying to figure out how to reinvent ourselves and how to reinvent what each day looks like, and how our family manages education and work and transportation and socialization and all these other things. And so in a way, crisis can present opportunities to try new things that we would never have considered if our life was just going along smoothly.
Right.
And so we can kind of look for the silver lining to this crisis cloud and see, okay, what can we do not only to figure out how to deal with the present crisis, but how to look for ways to maybe do things even better than they were when we thought everything was just fine.
Right. That's a really good point. I was listening to a business podcast. I think it was the Donald Miller Story Brand podcast. And he made a comment. He was like, what is possible because of this situation that wasn't possible before?
Right.
And it's just an expansive, possibility-driven way of looking at things. And it just feels more open,
I like that. And that's a great question to ask, what is possible now? Because when things are going smoothly, we're not generally inclined to pursue change.
Right.
And so sometimes it takes a crisis to make us ask that question, what is possible now? So I love that.
Mm-hmm, that's good. So homeschooling as a single mom, that's a lot, because not only do we have to work and homeschool and do all the things, but I mean, we have all the things we have to do. We most of the time sole provider. May or may not get child support, like depending on your situation, it could be even more difficult. So how did being a single mom affect your homeschool, and how did you work that out? What are some things?
Well, after sort of the initial shock and time of grieving what was lost, and I think it's important to take some time to heal from something like that. But I realized we had to find a new normal. my ideal homeschool, my fairy tale dream is, snuggling up with my kids on the couch and reading great books aloud, for just hours, and learning through conversation and following our own schedule and all that kind of thing, and customizing everything for my kids. And that's beautiful. And a lot of people are able to do that, but that wasn't going to work for us anymore. And I realized that I needed help. And so I learned to delegate and eliminate.
What does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Well, you said you're still in the early, but to delegate and eliminate and outsource, first of all, eliminating, we have to look at something's going to have to give. We can't add something without subtracting something, because who doesn't have a life that's already completely full? So if we're going to add something like being the sole provider and homeschooling, or as other people may be dealing with now, suddenly adding homeschooling to their jobs and their lives when maybe they weren't expecting to, what is it that we're going to eliminate? There are some things we just can't do anymore. I'd like to think that housekeeping is one of them, but I can't eliminate that entirely.
We do crafts with glitter, so the house is always shiny.
You're a better woman than I am. I've made glitter the enemy that never passes the door. But the things that can't be eliminated can be delegated. One of the things I did was train my boys how to run the house. And I am a perfectionist. That's what makes me a good editor, but it's also, not always the best interpersonal skill. So to say that I trained my boys how to take over the house, maybe they didn't do it exactly as well as I did, but I got to the point where my boys were taking care of all the housekeeping, all the cleaning, all of the pet care, all of the yard work, a lot of the cooking, all of the laundry except my own personal clothing. And this is funny because it got to the point where my youngest son wouldn't let me fold the towels because I didn't do it right. He did it better. So, and as they grew older, and then man, once they got driver's licenses, they know how to shop, they know how to bag the groceries, they know where to put them away. I've always said I have very grateful daughters-in-law, and I have two daughters-in-law now who are wonderful.
Mary-Jo Tate.
So, but then of course the difficulty is they've mostly all grown up and left home, and I've always said I'm going to have to hire an entire staff when the last one leaves. But so our kids are capable, and what's interesting is a lot of them were shocked when they found out that their friends didn't know how to do these things. I mean, doesn't everybody know how to load the dishwasher? Doesn't everybody know how to, put away the groceries? And, one day I walked in the kitchen and my 5-year-old was teaching his oldest brother how to cook an omelet. And I'm like, how did you learn how to cook an omelet? I don't even know. So they can become more self-sufficient, and there may be pushback at first, especially if they're used to having everything done for them. But it's also great because they've got life skills now. They have their own homes or apartments or whatever, and they already know how to do all this stuff. I think that's part of education, is learning how to do real world tasks. In my case, it just came about, inadvertently, because it was necessary to survive.
And
go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I totally agree with you. I've noticed even my kids, they have found a love for cooking. And even though my oldest doesn't cook that much, he enjoys it. And then he always likes to flex his little skills when, he has a friend over. He's like, oh, let me show you how to make a chicken marsala. I'm like,
I love it. I love it. That's awesome. So that was, managing things around the home. I also had to learn I've always worked from home as a book editor and a writer. And of course, those kinds of work require concentration. And concentration is pretty much incompatible with interruptions. So another thing we had to deal with was learning when I could and could not be interrupted. I used to tell them, interruptions can include, blood, fire, or water. I thought that was pretty straightforward. And then I realized I had to be a lot more specific. Blood doesn't mean that you pricked your finger and there's one molecule of blood. It means there's, a gaping artery. Fortunately, we never had a gaping, gushing artery, but the contrast there. Water doesn't mean that an ice cube melted on the kitchen floor. It means that a pipe burst, I thought fire was fairly straightforward, but you really do have to spell things out, because one day I heard this chaos erupting, and with 4 boys, I learned to mostly ignore chaos in the background unless I was notified that it required, my intervention. So I heard things getting louder and louder, and I finally thought, this is escalating. Maybe I better go see what's going on. I go out, and they say, Snowball's on fire. Snowball was our cat. Somehow he had gotten an ember that had popped out of our wood stove, had gotten on his tail. You have not smelled anything until you have smelled scorched cat fur. Well, the cat was not literally in flames.
No.
He just had a tiny little, spark on his tail. But of course, he was terrified. He was more terrified by the kids chasing him around. They thought their cat was going to die. I thought the cat was going to go under the sofa and catch the sofa on fire and the whole house on fire. So finally, one of my kids catches the cat, extinguishes the little spark with his thumb, which didn't even really get scorched. And we all sort of, catch our breath. And eventually, after they stopped being hysterical and I stopped freaking out, I said, what were you thinking? Why didn't you tell me the cat was on fire? And with perfectly straight faces, they said, well, Mom, we didn't want to interrupt your work. And so, you've got to
wait. You can interrupt me.
This falls under the category of yes, interrupt Mom. Let me know. So anyway, that was the most hilarious and potentially hazardous non-interruption. But it did show me that they were trying to respect my work time. So that teaching your kids when you can be available. And then having boundaries where you're not available, except for things like, a flaming cat. That's important. And it
feels like that needs to be the title of a memoir or something.
Yeah. Why didn't you tell me the cat was on fire? I think that would be a great title for a memoir. I'll tuck that away. So you've got figuring out how to do things around the house, figuring out how to continue with your job or your business or whatever. And then there's the actual homeschooling. And I mentioned that, my dream was the, really customized, cuddly family time and all that. And we did have some of that. But for me, the solution was joining a classical Christian co-op that a lot of my friends were already in. And that was hard because I had to surrender my autonomy. And sometimes they used curriculum or books that I would not have necessarily chosen myself. But it was a way to continue homeschooling that worked, that was compatible with me needing to work from home, with me not having as much time to design and instruct and supervise as ideally I would like to do. And they ended up being really well educated. For the last 3 years, three of the last 4 years, my youngest son attended some classes at a private Christian school where I taught. And he took some of his classes there and homeschooled some of the others because that was the best option for him at that time. So there are a lot of different ways to mix and match. You might put your kids in an online academy for everything. You might sign up for a local co-op. Of course, it's getting harder to meet in person now. You might sign up for 1 or 2 online classes. There are a lot of different ways you can do it. And especially if you're new to homeschooling, and you're overwhelmed and you're thinking, I don't know how to do all this stuff. Well, if you don't know chemistry, sign up your kid for a chemistry class. If you don't know Latin, but you want your kids to learn Latin, well, let somebody else teach them Latin. So there are a lot of ways to do it if you just let go of some kind of false mental image of what perfection is supposed to be. And instead you figure out what works for your family right now.
Yeah, no, I love that. I've had to do some of the same stuff myself and release the guilt of not, I mean, because anytime my kid needs something, I want to provide for that need. And I've had to learn that actually working is loving my kids the most right now, because that means they're going to have a roof and utilities paid and food and opportunities. Otherwise, so it's like, oh, well, no, I can't read you a book right now, but I have your back in a way that nobody else does.
Right.
So
Right.
I got you. Like I have to remind myself of that so much. But I mean, speaking of online classes, you're actually teaching an online class this year. Tell us more about that.
Oh, I'm really excited about it. I love books. My entire life is built around books. I collect them, I read them, I talk about them, I edit them, I write them, I help other people write books.
And you're like a world-renowned editor. I don't think people know this, and she's probably too humble to say this, but this woman has edited like apologia textbooks, and you have you're a Scott Fitzgerald scholar. Like, yeah. She's high level, y'all.
Well, since you brought that up, actually, the first novel I ever edited was The Great Gatsby. Okay, not the original one. I'm not that old. It was published in 1925. But when I was in grad school, I was the assistant for 3 years to the world's leading Scott Fitzgerald scholar. And so I got to help work on the scholarly edition of The Great Gatsby for Cambridge University Press. And that was so cool. And after that, everything's a little bit downhill, if you work on Gatsby.
Wow.
But I've worked on a lot of homeschool curriculum, Bright Ideas Press, Trivium Pursuit, Apologia, Figures in Motion, a whole lot of those publishers. Mm-hmm. And I've also worked with entrepreneurs who want to write a book to promote their business. But one of the things I really love most is actually teaching literature. I've taught in homeschool co-op for 9 years. I taught in a local Christian classical school for 4 years. And of course, I've been teaching my own kids for 23 years. And I absolutely love talking about great books with people, and especially it's wonderful when you're teaching kids who already love to read, but what's really exciting is when you've got someone who maybe doesn't love to read or really hates reading or just doesn't understand it or is confused or doesn't understand we have to read this stuff that's barely even written in English anyway, which one of my students said about Pilgrim's Progress. And so it's great to see that light come on. And one of the things I love to do, I don't teach literature the way that people teach science or history. Mm-hmm. I don't want what I call memorize and regurgitate tests, on characters. I want to go deeper. I want to teach students how to engage with what they're reading and how to make it their own, and for them to do a lot of the asking of questions. Mm-hmm. There was one notable day years ago in my homeschool co-op where I couldn't get any of the kids to talk. And so I told them, okay, stand up. And they all look at me like, okay, Miss Tate's lost her mind, but whatever. Okay, now, did you like the book? Go stand on that side of the room. Did you not like the book? Go stand on that side of the room. I don't care which side you stand on, as long as you can tell me why you're there. And that revolutionized my teaching, because when they verbalized what they liked or what they disliked, it wasn't about them standing in judgment on the book. It was about them figuring out how it worked for them and what their questions were. And I found that even a simple question like, and that's the only time I've ever done that, I called it the firing squad, because I was lining them up against the wall. Yeah. No actual shots were fired. But that day revolutionized my teaching, because I realized that even a very simple, apparently superficial question like, tell me what you liked or didn't like, can open up the discussion. And I have found that by letting my students speak first, instead of me coming in and delivering a lecture upon which notes must be taken, which is the way literature is often taught. Mm-hmm. I mean, I come in with notes for myself about what I want to, cover that day. But by letting the students speak first, I have found that very often they will, in one way or another, address 50 to 75% of the stuff that I would have lectured about, but it comes from them. And then they begin to debate back and forth. And then if somebody goes off the rails, I can correct it and all that. But it's just beautiful to see, because it teaches them not just how to read this book, not just to memorize what the green light in Gatsby symbolizes, but how to read and how to notice patterns and how to notice style. I also like giving creative assignments. One of the funnest things I've ever done is have my students write a new ending for Jane Eyre. And that's a lot of fun. And another of my favorite assignments, which we'll be doing this year in my American literature class, is I have them read one short story by William Faulkner and one short story by Ernest Hemingway.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually done this with 7th and 8th graders in the past year. I've always done it with high schoolers in the past, but it worked well for 7th and 8th. And then just ask them, what do you notice about how Faulkner writes? And even if they don't know the technical words for it, they notice. With Ernest Hemingway, they figured out the iceberg theory, which is that Hemingway doesn't tell everything. It's just sort of under the surface like an iceberg. And they didn't know there was something called an iceberg theory, but they felt it. Several of my 7th graders said, it's almost like there's something there that he's not quite telling us, and I can feel that it's there, but I'm not quite sure what it is. Like, Lord have mercy, a 7th grader figured out the iceberg theory of Hemingway's writing.
Incredible.
And that's so exciting to me. So then, to follow up on that, I give them a passage from Faulkner to rewrite in the style of Hemingway, which is pretty easy. Faulkner writes long, convoluted sentences with big words. Hemingway writes short, declarative sentence, things like, it was a good fire, it was a good cup of coffee. And it sounds simplistic, but there's more going on than that. So I have them rewrite Faulkner in the style of Hemingway, and then, which is even more challenging, I have them rewrite a passage from Hemingway in the style of Faulkner. And my 7th and 8th graders absolutely knocked it out of the park. I was astounded. And they're going to remember so much more about those writers than if I had stood up there and just delivered a lecture on, this is Hemingway's style and this is Faulkner's style, and notice his simile here and notice the image there. And it's so fun because all of the students I've taught, even the ones who will say it from, I don't like books, I don't even know why we have to read this stuff, will find a new book to love or a new author to love. Last year, a 7th grade boy came to me and said, could you recommend some more poems by John Greenleaf Whittier, because we only read one and I really want to read more of his work. Are you kidding me? A 7th grade, awesome. And so that just excites me so much. So I'm excited about teaching online this year. I'm going to be teaching the great books and authors of American literature in a Zoom style format. And I'm going to be using that same kind of discussion format. We are going to be reading The Scarlet Letter.
Okay.
And Huckleberry Finn.
Nice.
And of course, The Great Gatsby.
Got to.
And Fahrenheit 451. And To Kill a Mockingbird, which is one of my favorite books. Nice. And in addition, we're going to be reading poetry by Anne Bradstreet and the Fireside Poets and Emily Dickinson and Robert Frost. And we'll be reading some short stories by Poe and Faulkner and Hemingway and maybe a few others. And I'm just excited because as much as I love teaching in person and being there with students in person, this is going to allow me to teach and discuss books with students all over the country that I couldn't ever have taught in person anyway. And I've just finished being a student in an online class about the works of Eudora Welty, who's one of my favorite authors. And I was just blown away. It was 6 weeks long, 10 class meetings. And I was blown away by how much real communication and learning and even community could be built, even though we were looking at this kind of, Brady Bunch screen of Zoom squares, on our laptop. And so I'm really excited about the potential that this has for encouraging students all over the country to learn how to understand and appreciate and love great books even more. Because even if we don't like something to begin with, okay, let's take Hemingway for an example. Hemingway's just not my jam. I like, Faulkner and Welty and Fitzgerald a lot more, but Hemingway's wildly important and influential. And I found that as I began to understand the reason for Hemingway's style more, I began to appreciate it more and thus to enjoy it more. So sometimes even the book that a student is most resistant to, once they begin to understand it, by engaging with it on a personal level, they end up loving it. I've had students fall in love with Edgar Allan Poe, with Anne Bradstreet,
Mm-hmm.
Fitzgerald, with Welty, and it really lights a fire. And the thing I love about that is that it's not just checking off, okay, we've got, literature done for this year, but hopefully with a lot of these students, it's building on or even initiating a lifelong relationship with books and giving them the power to grapple with great writing, even if it's not necessarily easy. And I just love that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I mean, some of the assignments that you talked about, I'm like, this is a writing class too. I mean, I love seeing that symbiotic or that reciprocal relationship between writing and reading.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so I love how I mean,
yeah,
I guess that's that editor and
yeah,
you just like
yeah.
pulling all that.
Well,
That's, yeah,
I'm
that
not
sounds like
actually
a great
teaching
class.
full-scale composition, but I do have
Yeah,
students journal about their reading and also those assignments like that in a way that that we focus on the content. And I do think that writing about what you're reading is an important part of engaging
right.
with it. And I've found even in having students just write a short journal entry about each class's reading assignment, that helps me know, are they understanding it, what their
Right.
questions are, what they're noticing? Are they just cranking out a surface level plot summary, or are they really asking questions? And it's just a beautiful thing to see, again, especially the students who were resistant, to begin to open up and to understand and to feel comfortable with.
Mhm.
They don't have to come with all the answers, they just have to come with some questions, and then we can look at it together. And I just love that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh, well, it sounds like an amazing class. That book lineup is incredible. And
Yeah,
so
it's fun.
where can they go find out more about your class and sign up? Because y'all should sign up. This is an amazing class.
Yeah, we do have a few spaces left. I do have a class for 9th through 12th grade, and also another class for adults. There are lots of adults who are wanting to, either continue their education or maybe get the education they've never had. It's the same book list.
Hmm.
The high school class is on Tuesday mornings, and the adult class is on Tuesday evenings. And you can find out all the details at MaryJoTate.com.
Okay.
And that's Joe is J-O, MaryJoTate.com, and find everything you need to know.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom and experience and about your class. Do you have any last words that you want to share with the listeners before we end today?
Sure. Well, first, thank you so much, Jennifer, for letting me join you today. It's been fun to talk with you. And in terms of, parting words for our listeners, I just want to remind you that wherever you are on your homeschool journey or whatever stage of life, maybe you've been homeschooling for a while and struggling with it. Um, Maybe you've been homeschooling, but you've been depending on in-person meetings and lots of activities that have suddenly been yanked away from you. Or maybe you never thought about homeschooling, and because of the pandemic, you're suddenly thrown into it this year. Remember, find peace in the space between the ideal and reality.
Mm.
Do what you can. And above all, lean on God's faithfulness, because none of this is catching him by surprise.
Mhm.
He is gracious, and he will sustain us even when we feel like we can't go on. So on those hard days when you feel like everything's, tumbling to pieces all around you and you're not quite sure what to do what you can, but most importantly, lean on God and his faithfulness.
Amen. Amen. Well, thank you again so much. This has been a treasure, and follow Mary-Jo Tate if you're interested, and you have her website. Do you have any social media channels you want people
Yes,
to follow you?
on Facebook, Flourish at Home with Mary-Jo Tate. And also, Facebook is mainly where I hang out right now.
Mhm.
And the MaryJoTate.com, which takes you to my class, will also lead you to my blog for readers and book lovers. You can find it on that same site.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us, and we will see you later. Have a good one.